Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the show, I interview Martin Biermann. Martin is Chief Product Officer at the HRS Group. And HRS is a global tech company with a focus on business travel and one of the top hotel travel portals in the world. Now, I invited Martin on the show to discuss the megatrends that are affecting business travel today, and then to dig a little deeper into hotel reservation systems. Hotels are one of the largest corporate travel costs, but traditional booking methods don't allow travelers to make bookings based on all available data, such as security, sustainability, safety, and satisfaction measures. And so the second half of our conversation focuses on how to use technologies like AI to reduce the paradox of choice when making purchase decisions. This is something that obviously applies to hotels because we use that really as the heart of our discussion, but it's something that does also apply to all purchases, the same kind of processes and approaches that you take. So let's go into the conversation where I started by asking Martin how he found himself in the corporate travel business.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. My background is in software engineering, and it's always been like that. And back in the days, I was chief technology officer at a large incubator here out of Berlin, where I'm located. And at some point, I exited there, and I created or built two startups myself. And one startup was about recommending travel itineraries on the leisure side based on Facebook's graph data and social networks data that people basically leave traces in there on their taste and on the topics that they're interested in. We use that data in order to build the perfect itineraries for a romantic trip or for a family trip and trips going to the side of beaches or rather into the mountains. And that was my first attempt to travel.
So as a software person, how do you think about solving challenges? Because that's obviously what you are doing today in your role at HRS is, helping folks solve challenges from a business travel perspective. But how do you bring that software kind of development mindset to problem solving?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. It's I would say engineers generally have a specific mindset how they approach topics, and of course you look a lot into what is the outcome you want to achieve, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then you look for a digital answer to that problem. And so I think it's really all about gathering data and information and basically coming from the result. And then usually you try to cross the bridge when you're there. So instead of, coming up with the full and final and complex solution, you try to solve small pieces that brings you forward. And so I would say the software approach is certainly data-driven, is looking into a digital process and specifically something that is ideally from an experience point of view, super intuitive and easy to use, easy to navigate, and the software takes away a lot of the tedious parts of the solution. So it's all about experience based on data, I would say.
Now, does the experience piece, does that come at the end? You've kind of designed a way that software can solve a problem or present information, and then you look at, okay, what's the easiest way to present that in a way that will, drive adoption and usability? Or do you design with like the user experience in mind right at the very beginning?
Yeah, it's an interest. Yeah, I would say it's tricky for me to answer that because I might be a little bit biased because now for many years I'm doing product also, and that entails, of course, looking into, okay, what's the experience we want to create? So somebody who's just purely on the engineering side would probably respond differently here. But for me, it's always a mix of both. So it's basically looking into, okay, what is the experience that we want to deliver, and how can that be framed as an interactive experience basically on a digital product. But second, also how can the software really support to get there? So the user experience is definitely one of the starting points to define of what is this target product supposed to do and how is it supposed to be interacted with.
Well, I could probably it's really fascinating to me because I don't have that experience as, in designing software, of the thought process behind designing the software. I could probably do a whole conversation on that, but I know that that's not really what we're here to talk about today. I appreciate you giving me some insight into how you think about solving problems ultimately as a software engineer. What I wanted to talk about today is, you're obviously in the corporate travel space and spend all day every day in the travel space. I want to talk a little bit about the mega trends that you're seeing right now, and then we're going to pivot a little bit to, okay, how can we adapt our corporate travel programs, based on the changes, kind of the macro trends that we're seeing in the travel space. We're recording this in the coming towards the end of summer 2022. What are the major kind of business travel trends that you're seeing right now?
I would say the interesting or most impactful business travel trends, interestingly, probably aren't really business travel trends. They're actually trends outside of business travel that are impacting, of course, the way how we travel, how we plan our trips, but also how we manage that category. And for me, I would say the big, probably 2 or 3 mega trends here that worth noting is, first of all, I would say, is of course the consequences out of the pandemic. So how is duty of care managed when it comes to safety and security of travelers? I think still a lot of travelers are very hesitant to get back on the road and to basically feel safe and secure. And also there's new obligations or new focus into this area from when we talk about corporate travel and corporates managing that category. The second element after the pandemic, probably that is most outstanding, everybody would agree, is how we think about sustainability. So during the years of the pandemic, I think a major shift has happened in this direction. I think from what I read, 70% of climate action laws have been just basically made during the last 5 years only. And also, I think there's a new interest by travelers specifically to understand, okay, what's my impact on the environment? What's my impact to local communities? And how can I do my part in being more sustainable? And that ties also to the third, I would say, big change that is impacting business travel, which is the war for talent. So that is still ongoing and is ever increasing in its force, I would say. So a lot of new demand around employee flexibility, personalized employee experiences. Tend to give business travel also in some industry or for some of our customers a new focus more into something that is perceived as a perk for an employee to allow them to travel somewhere. And that also goes in this kind of work from anywhere kind of new segment where companies on the one side are obliged based on cost savings or other financial interests to reduce office spaces, but on the other side also make it more flexible and easier for acquiring new talents, also where they haven't been present so far. And I think along those lines are probably where most of the megatrends are sitting.
Right. Now, I want to come back to those, but I want to ask as well, from an economic cycle perspective, do you see the current health of the economy? And really, the economy is in such a strange place. It certainly is here in the States, and I know it is for at least in the UK. I've just spent a lot of time in the UK where, you have folks talking about recession while also employment being full, which are kind of two things that you don't necessarily expect when you're talking about an unhealthy economy. But are you seeing economic trends impacting business travel at the moment?
Yeah, so certainly the recession or the emerging recession has an impact. I think we see a lot of companies pricing in these future effects into their strategies, especially also around the corporate travel policy. I think you see different, kind of religions or schools of thought out there. Some are like, okay, how can we further reduce business travel? It just is perceived as an increase of risks to the company, not just financial, but also generally a risk for, again, safety, security of the employees, and so on. On the other side, you see then the school of thought about, okay, there's certain industries that are highly dependent on travel activities.
Right.
When we talk professional services, for example, there's no way that they can offer consulting services without, face-to-face meeting and a personal interaction, and maybe also some cells are not made basically virtually. I can hardly imagine somebody selling basically a nuclear plant to be
Right.
graded, or a wind turbine basically to sell it via Zoom, right? So I think that is certainly one of the bigger impacts on the recession side. How can we manage business travel as a cost efficient kind of expenditure? The other element I see is, of course, the consequence of labor shortage everywhere on the supply side, but also in travel management teams on the customer side. And last but not least, of course, we see from let's say, we call this the great decoupling or the global decoupling of supply chains, that overall domestic travel has picked up quite quickly after the pandemic, whereas international travel is still something that is struggling. And also here, I think, when you look at how airplanes are basically flying through the air, you see a lot of turnouts now around the Ukraine, around Russia. And so I think also here a lot of impact on the business travel segment when it comes to decoupling and the consequences of geopolitical shifts, I would say.
So it's definitely an interesting time to be in the corporate travel space, and something, we're obviously encouraging folks from a procurement perspective who are either managing corporate travel and trying to figure out strategies around some of these changes, or if they're not managing corporate travel perhaps as strategically as they may be able to give some tools to them to really demonstrate the value that procurement can bring to the table. And this is something that, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change within the travel space, which it seems to change really. Where you would think before you're planning in terms of 1 year cycles, now you're planning in 1 month or 3 month cycles, because you're not quite sure how things are going to go, over the short term as well as the long term. I want to just address some of the things that you talked about. You started at the very beginning talking about, kind of the impacts of the pandemic, but around duty of care. Could you talk a little bit around what is now kind of or what you're seeing is being expected by travelers of their companies in terms of either helping them travel, helping hesitant travelers get back on the road, or recognizing that it's not just, hey, you need to go and travel. There's, it's not just a yes or no kind of decision that a traveler has to make.
Yeah, I think to what you mentioned right before that question, I think it's tying deeply into each other. It's basically converging, right? So on the one side, you see this the fast changing environment to how we manage the business travel category, and I think it's all about what we usually call the VUCA world. So it's all about volatility, uncertainty, and new complexity, and immense complexity when we look into all these new questions we need to answer, and also the ambiguity of the market. Nobody knows. Another lockdown happening in the winter time, what is the impact, but also geopolitical changes. So a lot of elements or a lot of it is about how do we prepare ourselves for the unprepared, for the unknown, right? And I think that comes down also to the traveler's expectation. I think a traveler doesn't look at it as a segment, as a hotel segment or as an air segment or something like that. The traveler has their very trip in mind, which is from A to B and maybe to a C, and understanding, okay, how do I get there? How do I manage disruptions? How am I supported along those lines? And what if, eventually the hotel missed my reservation? What I do then? So I think a lot of it is that we need a new form of communication between how we build our programs, on top of travelers' actual needs and the disruptions they're actually facing. So something very tangible. and how do we communicate then through different systems, be it booking systems, but also, let's say, on the go mobile applications to basically be available, be in contact with the traveler. And I think most of it for travelers is rather the peace of mind. I can go somewhere. I can leave my feedback. I feel supported. I feel that the travel program is resonating to my needs on my actual trip, and I feel I get all of the stuff I need basically available. It's lesser about understanding, okay, does the company now have a new insurance for my next trip, or will my luggage be secured, or so, things like that. So it's, I think, more of a general feeling that needs to be managed of uncertainty and feeling eventually basically risks coming at one, than having very precise needs. I think nobody comes in and says, I want the carbon footprint from my hotel displayed there in a very technical metric. They just want to understand, is this considered in the way my company solicits the hotels for their program? The same for the safety and security. Nobody wants to now know ahead of time, okay, will there be hand sanitizing dispensers at the property? Will they have, did they disinfect my room before I arrive? These are things that you assume are given. You just want to know, did the company audit this property, or was there a third party that audited the property to basically align with the local statutory laws, and also with the kind of basics in hygiene or infection prevention, basically. So this is the peace of mind we need to provide and deliver through the program to the travelers, and then also be able to collect their feedback and basically bring this into this, in a short-term turnaround improvements to the program.
So we talked, right at the beginning around, using software to solve challenges. This sounds like a pretty big challenge of, how do we make all this information available to a traveler at the time that they make a reservation, so that I think for more than anything, they get peace of mind and probably see that it's not just a cost-based decision, that there are other factors that go into a decision around, for example, which hotel, which property, which chain they should actually stay at for their trip. So how is that something that you've then looked to address? Okay, we need to be able to do this. How can we share with a traveler that they can have peace of mind based on, which hotel, for example, they select?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's and that was a tricky journey, I would say, to get there. And it's we did a lot of different, or we tweaked the software in different ways. We implemented new programs, and we tried to actually make this information available to both the procurement manager when soliciting for their program, but then also to the traveler. And the information that we were looking after was of course information about, okay, which safety protocols, hygiene and infection prevention protocols do hotels follow or basically implement, and how do they have a governance around this? So who is controlling this for proper implementation on the results effectively, that this is a clean property. The same we did about our Green Stay initiative, where we rolled out basically standard-based and corporate standard-based reporting of environmental practices and baselining metrics by all properties globally, to provide in a uniform and normalized way one indicator, which is in the end for the traveler, basically the Green Stay label, green leaves that are displayed to basically showcase this property provided steep information and detailed information, and was vetted by a third party, and was then brought in comparison to the corporate's own sustainability strategy and even policy, if it exists, and was scored by the property along those lines. So now basically it's very easily and intuitively for you to understand, okay, there's a clean and safe label from HRS, which means the hotel follows the common practices of safety. There is the Green Stay label, so this is a green hotel. It is basically by all means, kind of vetted in that direction. And also for security, we partnered with an expert data science company called Geoshore in the space, who provide neighborhood security information along the security audits that our customers are conducting with their program properties. So now you have the full view. You see the price, which is basically the most or the best value for money you can get, because we have all of these different distribution sources from hotels in our platform integrated, so you have transparent to you all the different offers from the marketplace, from OTAs, from the hotels directly, but also wholesale rates available, so you understand, okay, I can get the best offer for the room I need in this system. I know it's clean, I know it's safe, I know the neighborhood is secure, and I now also see it's sustainable. So all of those aspects are very intuitively managed. But of course, it took us 2 years now to have all of this ready and let's say practically enabled for both sides, the procurement manager and the traveler.
And so then the traveler can make their decision based on a lot more available information than just price, ultimately, or should I say, historically, it's like a price and a brand discussion, isn't it? I'm a part of a certain program, and so I want to travel, if it's in my travel program, to a certain chain, but also price is a driver. Now you can actually look big picture at all the different data elements that are all kind of coming together in one place as you're making that decision.
Absolutely. So it's all about status recognition. It's about distance. Nobody wants to commute 45 minutes in the morning to get to wherever they need to go. And of course, it's about then safety, security, and sustainability. And as a last point, I would say really the traveler cares about price.
Right.
Is it in the policy? Am I allowed to go there? Yes or no? That's probably for most of them what counts.
Mm-hmm.
But foremost, the first piece is, of course, specifically in North America, that is of importance is status recognition. Will I be treated like a corporate traveler, a high-value customer in this hotel, or will I just be treated like everybody else? So this is where we make sure the program has status matching and everything in there, or you basically, you have everything in one view and you're not overwhelmed by too many hundreds of thousands of hotels. Of course, you always can go there. But our recommendation engine makes also sure that all of these, what we call 5S dimensions that I mentioned before, are optimized, and you get usually the best recommendation is the first one in the list. So that's where we see the highest conversion rate from. And that's now the product guy talking. So the first hotel we list or we recommend in the hotel list in the different online booking tools receives roughly 1/4 of all of the bookings, and then the 20th sees only 0.02%. So the recommendation engine also tries to make it easy and fast for you to get there.
It's kind of like a Google search for hotel reservations.
Absolutely.
You're always going to the ones at the top of the page, top of the first page.
Absolutely, exactly. And this is, formerly we did some data analysis in the different online booking tools our customers are using and that are integrated with our APIs. And we found that on average, users search for more than 20 minutes to find the right hotel and to check out on that. And we have basically cut this down to 6 minutes. So it shows that it's resonating, and we also see a 30% higher conversion rate, so that the risk of churn is much lower, because you need to provide the right information that they care about, and then it needs to be fast and easy to get to this hotel and check it out with automated payment. You don't want to deal with paperwork, cost center selection, and all of that. So it should be intuitive and fast forward, like a consumer grade experience you would expect.
Yeah, and I can certainly empathize with that. I know I spend far too much time looking for hotels whenever I'm traveling, because it's a hugely personal decision.
Yeah.
Because there are so many different factors that come into what property you want to choose, that it's really hard to go and say to somebody, well, I want it close to somewhere where I can go for a run in the morning, or I want it to have this feature or that feature. So I end up spending far too much time doing all that research. So I can certainly see the value in delivering all that information up front, and the time that saves somebody in making their travel reservations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we even extended this now with a new product that we launched called Browser Plugin, where we basically take over a little bit of the front end experience of some online booking tools. And so when you basically go somewhere further where you need a rail ride or basically an air segment, you basically usually start then not with the hotel. So you usually start then with the air segment, so the transport element. And once you have this completed in the online booking tool, we make an instant recommendation for the best property around basically where you wanted to go, so in the target point of interest. And we see good first results there, that basically we don't even need to have people go through the lengthy hotel booking process with the hotel list and looking through the details and filling in everything on the checkout pages. So It's one instant recommendation from the program, showcasing all the green elements, the safety, security scores of the neighborhood. And that is a peace of mind where we see many travelers just saying, okay, just give me this hotel, one click, I'm done. I don't need to bother with this hotel search process.
Yeah, in the procurement space, we always think about, we want to limit the choices that somebody has, because the more choices you give, the more leeway you give to make a decision that is perhaps not compliant, or kind of looking to game the system, or whatever that may be. So the more that you can put in front of a decision maker, here's 2 or 3 choices, and each one of these fits your needs. Pick one, versus here's 10 pages of choices that you have.
Right.
Is definitely a good thing from a procurement perspective, anyway.
No, absolutely, and it totally resonates with what the consumer in the end basically wants. So this is in product talk we usually call this the paradox of choice. So when everybody wants selection, but if you put too much selection in front of them, then they get overwhelmed and they rather defer this decision for later, which is of course a risk then basically for people churning. So showcasing somebody that they could go into the expert mode if they wanted to, but also say, okay, but you can save on that. You can save these 14 or 15 minutes or even more and just click here and you're done. That is basically what we see resonates, because of course there's different types of travelers. There's the heavy road warriors who optimize themselves and their loyalty programs and whatnot. But we have to say the majority of people who go and get on the road they just want to get it done, right, and want to make a good choice.
When you are going out to the hotels, the properties themselves, or when a procurement professional is going out and doing it and building their travel program and their hotel program for the year, how much of the data comes directly, because we talked about all the different data points that you can kind of make your decision on where you stay, how much of that data comes directly from the hotel and you're kind of asking it going through the process versus that you're grabbing from external sources?
Well, that's hard to. So I don't have an actual number on this, but I would, based on what I oversee, and we did some studies back then. So we analyzed how many attributes of information would you need in order to describe a business trip end to end, and we came down with 148 attributes that we need overall. And when you just think about this, from a computer science perspective, you could end up was I think 1.8 times 10 by the power of 20 or so different variations. So there's no way that the policy could basically, have the right trip recommendation for everyone. So it's certainly a machine learning problem. That's why the more data you get, the better. Yeah. I would say how much data is really coming from an RFP. This is usually more about getting the let's say the core elements of the deal done, of the contracting, and making sure certain price elements are fitting and so on. But the majority of data is click data. How did people search in the booking tool? Where did they look? Where did they find content? Where did they transact fast? Where did they take more time, and why was that? Where even did they churn from the managed channel? So we also take in data from hotel chains directly. We take in expense data. We take in and automatically analyze credit card data from the corporate plastic walking cards from employees and match that up to understand not only why do people go like in the managed channel, why did they behave a certain way, but also why did they went out? So what was the reason? What is it that they got outside? So there's a lot of data around those lines of what people consume on the road. Also the payment data we take from our level 3 data on the virtual payments is very important to understand what was the traveler after and what did they actually want to see in the booking system to be covered in the property, so that they can make a faster decision to say, okay, here I get the laundry, here I get my parking. Oh yes, they have EV charging. Yes, the hotel has a restaurant. I can even see eventually the menu of the restaurant if it features food that I'm interested. So there's a lot of data that we take into enable better decision making on the solicitation for a program. And most of it comes down to, will your travelers be interested to go there? And second, what is the price point and the negotiation components? Will the supplier give you the good price point to this? And then the third component is, will the supplier be able to reach that service level for you? So will they really be able to deliver you that value, or to your travelers that value consecutively going forward? Or do we see with other customers eventually risks that they will not realistically provide that? So, and yeah, to your point, the majority of data comes from the fulfillment angle, from the traveler's behavior, and still some piece, of course, from the actual RFP data.
Which is fascinating, because that's the kind of data that we've never really had access to. I speak as I used to run a travel program, but it was a long time ago. It was probably 20, well, maybe 18 years ago. So, times have obviously changed a lot since then. But, you have no behavior data, really. You try and cobble together a little bit of a picture from corporate credit card spending. But even then, the data wasn't, that great to be able to do anything with. So I'm really interested to understand, like, how now you think about some of your most advanced clients, how are they using all this data, this behavioral data that they have, to then drive kind of improvements in their program? Whether that's, we need to bring in hotels of this level in this location into the program, or we need to try and change people's behaviors because we're seeing that they're spending a lot of money at restaurants that we'd rather they not spend that money at. How do you see people use this data?
Yeah, I mean, that also was, of course, a process to get there, because you don't want to now look into like more than 148 attributes for every single hotel. I want to see, what's the coverage for each of these attributes. So that's, of course, not very either intuitive or practical to basically work with, especially when you have larger programs. I mean, we have customers that have programs of between up to 5,000 and even more properties globally. And so that's not really practical. So also, given the complexity, there's new attributes you're looking after, new information that you're looking for. And we can't have this all of this complexity pushed through to the procurement manager. So we basically found ways along our what we call the 5S paradigm. So that is, again, safety, security, sustainability, savings, but then also satisfaction. So we basically bring down, we look into different traveler segments. So we identify business units, but also the behavior in terms of cohort of activity around travel. So who is a road warrior to who is an occasional traveler, maybe traveling once a year to a company event or so. And then we look into their behavioral patterns driven down by market, but also by business unit, because usually you see in a certain function they work, in a certain market they work, under a certain subsidiary, then you see a clustering of the behavioral aspects. And then you understand which hotel services are basically surveyed in the review or in the feedback function of our platform, how well or how bad. So did the people in, let's say, so you might have a function that is a sales function that actively is on the road and meets customers and works also partially from the hotel environment. So they might rate Wi-Fi very frequently, but unfortunately very bad. Whereas you have another segment where this doesn't play a role at all. So what we basically bring this down to is a match score to say, overall, the satisfaction in this property to whatever the segments behind that use this property want is maybe 80%. So you understand, okay, no matter, or you don't necessarily need to understand, okay, what do my segments want, where and how. The machine already aggregates this to you to one metric that you're looking after and that you can trust and say, okay, if this is above 70%, we're good on the satisfaction S. Then we look into the sustainability. There we have scored now the different aspects. It's 9 categories of environmental practices, and then carbon footprint, water footprint, waste footprint. So the sustainability expert of your company has already provided scoring metrics. So you can basically look at any property that is maybe above a 7 out of 10, and then you're good to go. So we aggregate this, you get the point. We aggregate this to a certain one metric that you are after, that you optimize for, and in behind the configuration. And the data streaming takes care of coming up with the metric in a normalized way for each property. And then you basically just roll it up. So we make it very intuitive, and you can look into your key program KPIs, be it ADR, the most foundational metric when it comes to savings. You look into the green score coverage, look into the neighborhood security to be usually above 74, 75 out of 100 to make sure your travelers are safe or secure in the neighborhood. You look for that there's a safety and hygiene certification vetted externally available. And then for the satisfaction, you have a score as well. And so you keep these under your view, and then the system of ours automatically reminds you when some markets or some destination cities, for example, are falling below your targets of maybe the 70% threshold. And then you basically can go to action and say, okay, in the next continuous procurement iteration, which runs quarterly currently with us, you chip in this destination and say, I want to optimize it because it's falling off my target, also in the forecast.
It's really fascinating to me as a traveler as well, though. You talked about, for example, this idea of, if a property's got good Wi-Fi or consistent Wi-Fi based on the feedback that's been received. And then if you're a salesperson who's going to be working in that hotel room, quality of Wi-Fi and perhaps quality of the desk chair, are the things that they really care about, and that you can actually make recommendations based on the role type of the traveler, based on what it is common for them to be using, like what's the features that are most important to them. So I can imagine the benefits. Like the travelers probably don't realize they don't see what goes on behind the scenes. They just see that they have a good experience, a good travel experience.
Absolutely. This is. I mean, you mentioned a very vital point in this. What we found is crucial. What we do different is it's not a one-way road, right? So it's not just getting the data and then making your decisions on your program. It's also about reflecting that towards your hotel supplier, and this is what we, on the one side, on the general SLAs of rate availability, offer availability, and bookability, where we of course have post RFP metrics that we also display to the hotel that is part of your program, so they can log in and see their KPIs and how they perform in the channel. But also we give them more information about this cohort of travelers across customers is what is currently suffering from, I don't know, you should have an EV charging station because your competitors, 80% of them have some. You should have better Wi-Fi, or you should make that Wi-Fi free of charge because your competitors have that and people are not so satisfied with your Wi-Fi. So giving that intel actually enables the suppliers then to do a better job into the future, which is of course your interest to retain free market conditions. You don't want to get stuck with a market where you're left with suppliers that are not improving from here onwards. Same on sustainability, of course. You do not only want to know what is the carbon footprint today, but also what are my suppliers doing in order to bring that footprint further down, because ultimately we're on the pathway to net zero. So you need these indications, and you need to have a machine that communicates with you, but also with your suppliers, rather than just giving you a dashboard that you can make decisions on, and that's it.
Now, my last question before I start to wrap up, I talked about running a travel program all those years ago. And when I was running the travel program, it was just at the beginning of bringing online booking, versus call centers. And so we talk a lot about this idea of visual guilt, being one of the drivers of ROI, that when a traveler has something in front of them and they have 5 different prices, they're more likely to press to select the lowest cost one, versus if they called up a call center, where they'll just kind of take whichever is the one that they want. I'd love to know, here we are again, 20 plus years on, and all the different permutations and options and the information that a traveler is being presented with as they're making their reservations. What kind of behavior are you seeing from the travelers themselves? Like, are you seeing for them that it's a much more streamlined process, and it's an easier process for them to make their hotel bookings, and that they're making those reservations as well in line with what the company policies are more often?
So of course it's a small kind of strain you're on, basically, between, okay, you don't want to overload the traveler with too many options because they might get confused, so the paradox of choice. Whereas on the other side, the traveler wants to know, okay, did the system really consider everything? So that's where we basically highlight, okay, these are rates from, I don't know, Booking.com, Expedia. This comes from the hotel directly. This is a wholesale rate that we purchased. This is the company rate. And basically to give the traveler the peace of mind and showcase we have screened so and so many rates from these different channels, and this is the best offer we are recommending. But if you want, you can expand here and go into all the different rates and compare them yourself. But giving them both angles and both options is crucial, because then you change behavior, because at some point for the next trip and the trip after, basically people will say, okay, there's no reason for me to go into these details anymore, because I know they're screening all of these different channels, and this is literally the best offer for this room that I can get. And
they start to trust the recommendations that the system makes.
Exactly. And this is what we found also with procurement managers. You can go into all of the hundreds of different attributes we're looking into and go into the reporting of it in our KPI dashboard, but it's very tedious, and at some point you realize, wait a second, this is, with all of these new dimensions we're looking into, it's just way too complex, and it does not fit, let's say, a programmatic buying strategy. So at some point, it's of course, machine learning can be perceived like as a black box, but you have to gain trust from all participants, be it travelers, travel managers, so then also the procurement managers, to basically understand, okay, this is how the system works. This is how it optimizes it. I'm in control. I can configure it to put emphasis onto certain areas that are important for me, my company, or a particular segment of my business. And then I can configure it, and the machine optimizes or automates what I had in mind, basically across the destination, across the market, or even globally. So this was our process to basically get there, for more trust into the machine from all participants. And it will, of course, continue that way, because there will be new complexities, new data challenges. So it's really about, ultimately, the number one priority is to have the right data pipelining and foundation to be able to manage that data, and then simplify it to the kind of next step that either of these participants need to take. And this is also maybe interesting for you, or worth mentioning, is also where we expand this now to other segments. So we see, as it's basically one of the mega trends that we didn't mention in the beginning, where there's this convergence of work and travel. It comes a little bit, or ties a little bit, into the direction of war for talent, to basically enable people to travel and work from home or work from anywhere, and give them access to co-working spaces, to small meetings, to also collaborate with their peers while they're traveling or while they're working from home, either way. So that's what I meant, like, people or employees do not think in these strict segments or categories. They look at it from, what is the job I want to achieve, and how can I bring this all into my itinerary of work and travel. And this is where it's crucial to converge these different segments and look at them holistically, to say, where can I find suppliers where my employees can work, can stay, can meet, because the more I bundle, also the higher negotiation kind of empowerment I have. And so that's why broadening the scope and going beyond the segments, having a total trip perspective, is absolutely crucial to manage in the end the travelers or employees' expectation.
Yeah, that's one of those, as you say, we didn't talk about that trend, but we see that too, about, instead of people traveling for, point to point, they're going to a business trip because they're going to go and see a client or a customer or a prospect, or, meet one internal person. Actually, because so many more people are working at home, there's a lot more meetings, like small meetings, where everyone in the team is actually going and traveling to one location and meeting in one place, because that's taking the place of doing that in the office.
Absolutely.
And how that's driving different, it's companies are buying business travel in different ways than they were before, because they're now looking at a lot more small meetings rather than individual trips.
Yeah. No, I think it's not about buying a segment, or purchasing a hotel accommodation. It's more about, you're buying a trip.
Yeah.
So you're trying to. So the traveler always considers this in a whole and connected way, and I think the same we need to enable on the procurement side, to think about it and manage it holistically, and specifically on the edge of sustainability. There's no point in getting somebody in another hotel, which is maybe 10% cheaper, right, but then you have a higher commute with one of the ride shares, or so, a taxi, that takes you 20 minutes longer, and maybe 50 miles longer, and ultimately you basically generate way more greenhouse gas emissions just from the additional commute. So that's why all of these decisions can no longer be solely driven from a very vertical focus only.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time and kind of sharing some of the work that you're doing at HRS, but also it's really reimagining the art of the possible for how we manage our travel programs, and specifically some of the questions we've talked about here around, venues and hotels. I get excited by this because I know the limitations that the legacy technologies had when I was in a travel manager. We know within the procurement space and the problems that caused, but also that didn't really help us address this spend strategically. There's so many ways that I think procurement can bring value to hotel spend, and we've talked about some of them today. So one, thank you for that. I asked the really easy question at the end, is if anybody who's listening is interested in learning a little bit more, either about HRS or connecting with you directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's the easiest and fastest way to connect and leave a message, and I'm happy to come back on that, sure.
What I'll do is I'll leave a link to your LinkedIn profile in our show notes for today's episode. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to link to a white paper. We actually worked with your team on a white paper earlier in the year, which was one of the kind of the motivations for me to go a little bit deeper in our conversation today. So we have a white paper that we co-produced called Optimizing the Business Traveler Experience, Delivering Newfound Savings and Added Value. So if anybody is in the travel space, or you're thinking more specifically, how do I create value around corporate travel for my business, please do check out that white paper. And I'm going to include the link to that in our show notes page as well. And those are all just going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. You go to artofprocurement.com/podcast, you're going to find all the different podcasts that we produce each week. And you will, of course, come across this one today with Martin. So one last time, Martin, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.